The Galactic Concord had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. 17 ancient species had built an empire that stretched across 10,000 worlds. They had created wonders that younger races could not understand. They had ended war. They had ended hunger. They had ended suffering. Or so they believed. They called themselves the elder races. They looked down upon the younger species with a mixture of pity and disgust. They saw themselves as teachers, as guides, as the wise parents of a vast and unruly galaxy. And then, there was humanity. The humans had crawled out of their small blue world only 300 years ago. They had spread to a dozen star systems. They had built ships that were crude and loud. They had weapons that were brutal and effective. They fought wars among themselves. They killed each other over ideas and resources and pride. The Concord watched humanity with growing concern. Here was a species that had not outgrown violence. Here was a species that still remembered how to hate, how to fight, how to destroy. When humanity requested membership in the Galactic Concord, the elder races said no. "You are too young," they explained. "Too aggressive, too dangerous. Come back in 1,000 years when you have learned peace." Humanity did not argue. They simply turned away and continued building. They made their ships stronger. They made their weapons sharper. They expanded their territory and grew their numbers. They did not need the Concord. They did not want their approval. 200 years passed. The Concord continued to ignore humanity. The humans were a problem for another age, a concern for future generations. Surely they would destroy themselves eventually. All violent species did, but humanity did not destroy itself. It grew stronger. It grew smarter. It remembered every insult, every rejection, every time the elder races had called them barbaric and primitive. And then the Vraxith came. Nobody knew where the Vraxith originated. They appeared at the edge of conquered space like a dark cloud spreading across the stars. Their ships were not made of metal. They were made of flesh and bone and something that screamed when you cut it. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They did not demand surrender. They simply consumed. The first world to fall was Thesan Prime. 4 billion souls lived on that beautiful green planet. The Vraxith swarm descended like a plague of locusts. Within 6 days, nothing remained but bare rock and silence. The Concord responded with their elegant weapons. Energy beams that could slice through asteroids. Gravity wells that could crush small moons. Shield technology that had not failed in 8,000 years. The Vraxith adapted. They learned, they evolved, and they kept coming. World after world fell. The Shale Dominion lost 3 colony planets in a single week. The Vorthani Collective watched helplessly as their ancient homeworld was stripped of all life. The Keth Assembly, oldest of the elder races, saw their fleet reduced to burning debris in a battle that lasted only 4 hours. The Concord had forgotten how to fight. They had spent 12,000 years perfecting the art of peace. They had no generals. They had no battle plans. They had no soldiers willing to die for a cause. They had only fear. Ambassador Tethin Vorasi of the Shale Dominion was 900 years old. She had served her people for 7 centuries. She had negotiated treaties that ended conflicts spanning dozens of star systems. She had been called the greatest diplomat of her generation. Now she was running for her life. Her ship, a sleek vessel of crystal and light, fled through the burning wreckage of the Concord Defense Fleet. Behind her, the Vraxith swarm devoured everything in its path. She could hear them somehow, not with her ears, but with her mind. 1 billion hungry voices screaming for more. Always more. Her navigation officer looked up from his console. "Ambassador, we cannot outrun them. Our engines are failing." Tethin closed her eyes. This was how it ended. Not in the great halls of diplomacy, but in the cold darkness between stars. Consumed by creatures that did not even recognize her as a living thing. "There is one option," her officer said quietly. "The humans." Tethin's crystalline form flickered with surprise. "The humans? We rejected them. We called them savages. Why would they help us? Because they are our only hope." The ambassador stared at the tactical display. The Vraxith were closing in. She had perhaps 10 minutes before they were overtaken. 10 minutes to swallow her pride and beg for help from the species she had personally voted to exclude from the Concord. "Set course for the nearest human vessel," she ordered. The ship turned and accelerated toward a region of space the Concord had always avoided. Human territory. The domain of the barbarians. Captain Elena Vasquez was having a quiet day. The UNS Perseverance was on routine patrol along the border of human space. Nothing ever happened out here. The Concorde stayed on their side. Humanity stayed on theirs. It was an arrangement that suited everyone just fine. Elena was a career officer. She had joined the United Nations Stellar Command at 18 years old. Now she was 42, with gray streaks in her black hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of too many years in space. She had served on 12 different ships. She had fought in 3 border conflicts. She had watched friends die and enemies surrender. She thought she had seen everything. She was wrong. "Captain, we have an unidentified contact approaching at high speed," Lieutenant Torres called from the sensor station. Elena set down her coffee cup and walked to the main display. A small blip was racing toward them from Concorde space. Behind it, like wolves chasing a wounded deer, came dozens of larger contacts. "What am I looking at, Lieutenant?" Torres studied his readings. "The lead contact appears to be a Shale diplomatic vessel. The pursuing contacts are—" "I don't know, Captain. I've never seen anything like them." Elena frowned. The Shale were one of the most arrogant of the elder races. They had been particularly insulting during humanity's application to the Concorde. What were they doing here? "Hail them," she ordered. The communication officer worked his console. "No response, Captain." "Wait. I'm getting a priority distress signal. Universal emergency code." Before Elena could respond, the bridge filled with light. A crystalline figure materialized in the center of the command deck. It was humanoid but not human. Its body was made of something that looked like living glass. Light pulsed within it like a heartbeat. The figure collapsed to the deck and lay there, trembling. "Security to the bridge," Elena ordered calmly. "Medical team standing by." The alien raised its head. Elena could see fear in its strange, luminous eyes. She had never seen one of the elder races afraid before. They were always so composed, so superior. "Captain," the alien said. Its voice was musical, but the notes were discordant. "Wrong. I am Ambassador Tethan Vor Assi, of the Shale Dominion. I beg for sanctuary. I beg for help." Elena knelt beside the alien. "What's chasing you, Ambassador?" "The Vraxith. They have destroyed the Conquered fleet. They are consuming our worlds. Nothing we have can stop them." Tethan's light dimmed. "We have tried everything. Our weapons, our shields, our strategies. They adapt to everything. They learn too fast. They never stop. And you came to us? The primitives? The savages?" Tethan's form flickered with something that might have been shame. "Yes, we came to you. Because you are the only species in this galaxy that still remembers how to fight." Elena stood up slowly. She looked at the tactical display. The pursuing contacts were getting closer. In a few minutes, they would reach the border of human space. "Lieutenant Torres, analysis of those pursuing vessels." Torres worked his console. His face grew pale. "Captain, they're biological. The ships are alive, and there are hundreds more behind them. Thousands. I'm reading a swarm that stretches across 3 light years." Elena felt a cold knot form in her stomach. This was not a raiding party. This was not an invasion force. This was an extinction event. "Ambassador," she said, "tell me everything." Tethan told her. The Vraxith were a hive mind. Billions of individual creatures controlled by a single intelligence. They did not think like other species. They did not want territory or resources or power. They wanted only to grow, to spread, to consume all life in the universe and add it to their endless hunger. They had appeared 2 years ago at the edge of Concorde space. The elder races had tried to communicate with them. They had tried to negotiate. They had tried to understand what the Vraxith wanted. The Vraxith wanted everything. The first battles had been disasters. The Concorde's elegant energy weapons were designed for precision and efficiency. They could destroy individual targets with beautiful accuracy, but the Vraxith did not fight as individuals. They fought as a swarm. They absorbed losses that would have broken any other fleet. They adapted to each weapon they faced. They learned and evolved and kept coming. Within 18 months, half of Concorde space had fallen. Worlds that had stood for thousands of years were reduced to lifeless rocks. Species that had contributed to galactic civilization since before humanity existed were simply gone, eaten, absorbed into the endless hunger of the swarm. "Your weapons," Tethan said. "Your crude, brutal, primitive weapons. They might work where ours have failed." "Why?" Elena asked. "Because you never stopped building them. You never stopped improving them. You have weapons that we banned 10,000 years ago. Weapons that we considered too terrible to use. Nuclear fire, kinetic bombardment, chemical agents. Tethan's voice dropped to a whisper. You have weapons designed not for precision but for destruction, for killing as many enemies as possible in the shortest amount of time. Elena thought about the arsenal stored in the Perseverance's weapons bay. She thought about the missiles that could crack open small moons. She thought about the railguns that could accelerate metal slugs to a significant fraction of light speed. She thought about the Marines in their powered armor, trained to clear enemy ships with fire and blade. You laughed at us, she said quietly. You called us children playing with dangerous toys. We were fools, Tethan admitted. We thought we had evolved beyond violence. We thought we had no need for warriors. The ambassador looked up at Elena with desperate eyes. We were wrong. And now we need exactly what we rejected. Elena turned to her communications officer. Get me a priority channel to Fleet Command. Highest encryption. She looked back at the tactical display. The Vraxith swarm had stopped at the border of human space. They were watching, waiting, learning. Ambassador, Elena said, you need to understand something. If we help you, it won't be with elegant weapons and precise strikes. It will be with fire and steel and blood. We will do terrible things to your enemies, things that will haunt your species for generations. I understand, Tethan said. Do you? Because we don't fight clean. We don't fight fair. We fight to win. And we fight until the enemy is destroyed or we are. There is no middle ground. Tethan's crystalline form brightened slightly. For the first time, Elena saw something other than fear in the alien's eyes. She saw hope. That is exactly what we need, the ambassador said. The Concord has forgotten how to be ruthless, how to be savage, how to fight with everything we have. She reached out and touched Elena's hand. The contact was strange, like touching living ice. You remember. Your entire species remembers. It is written in your genes and your history and your soul. Elena stared at the alien for a long moment. 200 years of rejection. 200 years of being called primitive and dangerous and unworthy. And now they came begging for exactly those qualities. She should feel satisfied. She should feel vindicated. Instead, she felt only a cold determination settling into her bones. I'll make the call, she said. But the decision isn't mine. It belongs to all of humanity. She walked to the communications station and began recording a message that would change the fate of the galaxy. 12 hours later, the transmission reached Earth. Admiral Marcus Chen watched the recording in his office at Fleet Command Headquarters in Geneva. He was 61 years old, with a face like weathered stone and eyes that had seen too much death. He had commanded ships in 3 wars. He had lost friends and family to the cold void between stars. He watched the ambassador beg. He watched Captain Vasquez describe the threat. He watched the sensor data showing the Vraxith swarm spreading across the stars like a dark stain. When the recording ended, he sat in silence for a long time. His aide, Commander Sarah Park, waited quietly by the door. Get me the Secretary General, Chen finally said, and contact every flag officer in the fleet. We need to have a conversation about the end of the world. The United Nations Stellar Command Emergency Council convened within the hour. Admirals and generals joined from ships and bases across human space. Political leaders argued via holographic projection. Scientists presented data on the Vraxith threat. Intelligence officers shared everything they had learned about the enemy. The debate was fierce. We owe them nothing, Admiral Kowalski argued. They rejected us. They called us barbarians. Let them face the consequences of their arrogance. And when the Vraxith finish with the Concord, they will come for us, General Hassan countered. Better to fight them in someone else's territory than in our own. We don't have the resources for a war of this scale, another officer protested. Our fleet is designed for border defense, not galactic campaigns. Then we build more ships, we recruit more soldiers. We do what humans have always done when faced with extinction. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the noise. We fight. Secretary General Amara Okonkwo raised her hand. The chamber fell silent. She was a small woman with kind eyes and a spine of steel. She had led humanity through 3 crises in her 8 years in office. She had never flinched from hard decisions. We did not survive ice ages and plagues and wars, and our own worst impulses to hide when darkness comes for others, she said. We did not climb out of the mud and reach for the stars just to watch another species face extinction alone. She stood and looked around the chamber. They called us monsters. Perhaps they were right. But monsters can choose what they fight for. Monsters can choose to protect instead of destroy. Her voice hardened. The Vraxith are the true monsters. They consume everything they touch. They will not stop with the Concord. They will come for us eventually. For our children. For our future. She took a deep breath. I say we go to them first. I say we show the galaxy what human monsters can do when we choose to defend instead of conquer. I say we answer the call. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would go to war. Across human space, the message spread like wildfire. Shipyards that had been quiet for decades roared back to life. Recruiting stations were overwhelmed with volunteers. Old soldiers who had thought their fighting days were over reported for duty. On Mars, factories began producing weapons on a scale not seen since the last Great War. On Luna, training camps filled with young men and women learning the ancient arts of combat. On Earth, children watched their parents leave for distant stars and wondered if they would ever come back. Captain Elena Vasquez received her orders 3 days after her encounter with the ambassador. She was promoted to Commodore and given command of the First Contact Squadron. Her mission was simple: escort Ambassador Tethan back to Concord space and assess the threat. As she watched her small fleet assemble, she thought about what lay ahead. She thought about the swarm, about the billions of hungry mouths waiting in the darkness, about the elder races who had scorned humanity for 2 centuries and now placed all their hopes in human hands. She thought about fire and steel and blood. Are you ready for this? Ambassador Tethan asked, standing beside her on the observation deck. Elena watched the stars. Somewhere out there, an enemy was waiting. An enemy that had never faced humanity. An enemy that had no idea what was coming. We were born ready, she said. We just needed someone to give us permission. She turned and walked toward the bridge. There was work to do. A galaxy to save. And a lesson to teach. The aliens had begged for aid. Humanity was about to answer. The War Council met in Geneva, deep beneath the mountains where humanity had once hidden from its own nuclear weapons. The chamber was old and cold and filled with history. Maps covered the walls showing wars that had shaped human civilization. Names were carved into stone pillars. Names of battles. Names of heroes. Names of the dead. Admiral Marcus Chen stood at the central table, surrounded by holographic displays showing the current state of the galaxy. The images were not encouraging. Concord space was bleeding red. World after world had fallen to the Vraxith swarm. The elder races were in full retreat, their elegant ships burning in the void. This is what we face, Chen said to the assembled officers. A hive-mind civilization with an estimated population of over 1 trillion individuals. Their swarm spans approximately 400 light-years and is expanding at a rate of roughly 20 star systems per month. He changed the display to show a Vraxith bioship. The thing was massive and hideous. It looked like something from a nightmare. Organic and twisted and wrong, their vessels are alive. They heal damage. They adapt to weapons. They learn from every engagement and share that knowledge instantly across the entire swarm. Chen paused. In 2 years, they have destroyed more than 100 elder race worlds. They have killed approximately 200 billion sentient beings. The chamber was silent. The Concord's weapons are not working, Chen continued. Their energy-based systems were designed for precision strikes against conventional targets. The Vraxith simply absorb the damage and keep coming. They have nothing that can deliver the kind of widespread destruction needed to actually thin the swarm. General James Okafor, commander of the Marine Corps, leaned forward. And we do. Yes, we have nuclear warheads, kinetic bombardment platforms, antimatter torpedoes, weapons the Concord banned 10,000 years ago because they considered them too destructive. Chen allowed himself a grim smile. They forgot that sometimes destruction is exactly what you need. Secretary General Okonkwo spoke from her position at the head of the table. What are our chances, Admiral? Chen took a deep breath. This was the question he had been dreading. Honestly, I don't know. We've never fought anything like this. The Vraxith don't think like any enemy we've ever faced. They don't have supply lines to cut. They don't have commanders to kill. They don't have morale to break. They just keep coming until they're all dead. Or you are. He pulled up more data on the display. Based on our analysis, We believe that our weapons will be more effective than the Concords. The Vraxith have adapted to energy weapons. They've had 2 years to learn how to counter them, but they've never faced nuclear fire. They've never faced kinetic bombardment. They've never faced human soldiers. So we have surprise on our side, Okonkwo said. For now. The moment we engage, they'll start learning. They'll adapt. The question is whether we can kill them faster than they can evolve. Admiral Kowalski raised his hand. He was an older man with a thick Polish accent and a reputation for caution. And what happens if we lose? What happens if we commit our forces to saving the Concord and the Vraxith destroy us anyway? We'll have thrown away everything for people who spent 2 centuries spitting on us. If we lose, humanity dies, Chen said simply. But that was always going to happen eventually. The Vraxith aren't going to stop at Concord space. Once they've consumed the elder races, they'll turn their attention to us. We can fight them now, while we have allies. Or we can fight them later, alone. The debate continued for hours. Officers argued about strategy and logistics. Politicians worried about the cost. Scientists presented data that nobody fully understood. Through it all, Chen watched and listened and waited. He had known since the moment he saw the first transmission that humanity would have to fight. The only question was whether they would fight smart or fight stupid. Finally, Secretary General Okonkwo called for a vote. We have heard the arguments, she said. We know the risks. We know the cost. Now we must decide. Do we answer the call? Do we go to war for a galaxy that rejected us? She looked around the chamber. Those in favor? Every hand rose. Okonkwo nodded. Then let it be recorded that on this day, the United Nations Stellar Command voted unanimously to defend the Galactic Concord against the Vraxith threat. May history judge us kindly. Chen felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The decision was made. Now came the hard part. Admiral Chen, Okonkwo said, you will command our forces. What do you need? Chen had prepared for this question. Everything. Every ship we have. Every soldier who can hold a weapon. Every weapon we can build. This is not a border conflict. This is a war for survival. Ours and everyone else's. You'll have it, Okonkwo promised. God help us all. The mobilization began within hours. On Earth, the great shipyards of Luna and Mars, and the orbital stations began working around the clock. Ships that had been scheduled for decommissioning were repaired and upgraded. New vessels were laid down with construction schedules that would have seemed impossible in peacetime. The military academies accelerated their training programs. Cadets who would normally have spent 4 years learning their craft were pushed through in 18 months. Veterans who had retired decades ago were called back to service. Anyone who had ever worn a uniform received a message asking if they were willing to fight. Most said yes. On the colony worlds, factories that produced consumer goods were converted to military production. Mining operations that had focused on commercial metals shifted to extracting the heavy elements needed for weapons and armor. Farmers increased their yields to feed an army that was growing by the day. The news spread through human space like a wildfire. People watched the images of Vraxith destruction. They saw the worlds reduced to barren rock. They heard the stories of billions dying in screaming agony, and they made a choice. They would not let it happen to them. Recruiting stations were overwhelmed. Young men and women lined up by the thousands, waiting hours for the chance to enlist. Parents kissed their children goodbye and left for training camps. Grandparents who had fought in the last Great War put on their old uniforms and reported for duty. I never thought I'd see this again, Admiral Chen said as he watched the mobilization data scroll across his screen. An entire species united for war. His aide, Commander Park, nodded. The Vraxith did something the Concord never could. They gave us a common enemy. The Concord gave us something too, Chen said quietly. They gave us a reason to prove ourselves. Every human who puts on a uniform carries 200 years of insults with them. They called us savages. Now we're going to show them what savages can do. The first expeditionary force assembled in the Sol system. 200 warships gathered in orbit around Saturn, their crews completing final preparations for the long journey to conquered space. They were the newest vessels in the fleet, equipped with the most advanced weapons humanity had ever built. At the heart of the formation sat the UNS Hammer of Terra. She was a dreadnought, the largest warship humanity had ever constructed. Her hull was 3 kilometers long and bristling with weapons. She carried enough firepower to crack open a small moon. Admiral Chen would command the fleet from her bridge. He toured the ship the day before departure, meeting with officers and crew. They were young, most of them. Young and eager and afraid. They had trained for war but never experienced it. They had no idea what waited for them in the darkness between stars. Chen knew. He had seen war. He had watched friends die. He had given orders that sent thousands to their deaths. He carried those memories like stones in his heart. "Sir," a young lieutenant asked during one of his tours, "do you think we can win?" Chen looked at the young man. He could not have been more than 25. His uniform was crisp and his eyes were bright, and he had no idea how much blood he was about to see. "I think we have to," Chen said. "Failure is not an option. But the Vraxith, they've destroyed everything the Concorde threw at them. What makes us different?" Chen smiled. It was not a kind smile. The Concorde forgot how to fight. They spent 12,000 years evolving beyond violence. They convinced themselves that war was something primitive species did, something they had outgrown. He put his hand on the young man's shoulder. "We never forgot. We never stopped preparing. We never convinced ourselves that the universe was safe." He gestured at the warship around them. "This ship exists because humans never stopped believing that someday, something would come for us. Something that couldn't be negotiated with, something that couldn't be reasoned with, something that would have to be destroyed." The lieutenant swallowed hard. "And the Vraxith are that something?" "Yes, they are. And we are what we've always been. Predators, survivors, the meanest, most stubborn species in this galaxy." Chen's eyes hardened. "The Vraxith have never faced anything like us. They've eaten species that surrendered, species that fled, species that tried to fight with clean weapons and fair tactics." He leaned close to the young lieutenant. "We don't surrender, we don't flee, and we sure as hell don't fight fair." The fleet departed the next morning. Chen watched from the bridge of the Hammer of Terra as 200 ships engaged their faster-than-light drives and vanished into the void. The journey would take 3 weeks. 3 weeks to prepare, 3 weeks to plan, 3 weeks to wonder if any of them would ever see home again. Ambassador Tethan Varasi traveled with the fleet. She had been assigned quarters aboard the Hammer of Terra, where she served as a liaison between humanity and the surviving Concorde forces. She spent most of her time in the command center, watching the humans prepare for war. "You are different from what I expected," she told Chen one evening as they reviewed tactical data. "Different how?" "I thought you would be. Rougher. More brutal. The stories we tell about humans paint you as mindless warriors. Savages who fight for the joy of destruction." Chen laughed softly. "Some of us are like that. But most of us, we're just people. We have families. We have dreams. We have fears." He looked at her with tired eyes. "We don't fight because we enjoy it. We fight because sometimes it's the only option." "Then why are you here?" "We rejected you. We insulted you. We told you that you were not worthy of joining our civilization. Because you asked for help," Chen said simply. "And because it's the right thing to do." Tethan was silent for a long moment. "My people do not understand this. We would never risk our lives for a species that had treated us as we treated you. That's the difference between us," Chen said. "You fought when it benefited you. We fight when it's necessary, even when it costs us everything." He turned back to his tactical displays. "Now let's talk about the Battle of Thesson Prime. I want to know everything about the Vraxith formation." The fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of conquered space. What they found was worse than Chen had expected. The Vraxith swarm had spread further than intelligence reports suggested. Entire star systems had been consumed. Debris fields marked the graves of Concorde fleets. Emergency beacons transmitted distress signals from ships that had been dead for weeks. "Dear God," Commander Park whispered as she surveyed the destruction. Chen said nothing. He had seen death before. He had seen destruction on scales that most people could not imagine. But this was something else entirely. "Sensor report," he ordered. The sensor officer worked his console. "Admiral, I'm detecting Vraxith presence throughout this sector. Minimum swarm estimate is approximately 50,000 bioships. There are also signatures from Concorde vessels. Approximately 200 ships holding position around the 4th planet. The Concorde survivors," Tethan said. "They are defending the evacuation point." Chen studied the tactical display. The Concorde ships were badly outnumbered. The Vraxith swarm was closing in from multiple directions. In a few hours, they would be surrounded and destroyed. All ships, battle stations, Chen ordered. We're going in. The human fleet accelerated toward the embattled Concorde position. As they approached, Chen opened a communication channel. Attention Vraxith Swarm. This is Admiral Marcus Chen of the United Nations Stellar Command. You are engaged in hostile actions against species under our protection. Break off your attack immediately or face destruction. There was no response. Chen had not expected one. All ships, weapons free. Show them what humanity can do. The hammer of Terra's railgun spoke first. Massive metal slugs accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed and tore through Vraxith bioships like bullets through paper. Nuclear missiles followed, their warheads detonating in brilliant flashes that vaporized dozens of targets at once. The Vraxith swarm reacted with surprise. For 2 years, they had faced energy weapons that they could adapt to. They had faced tactics that they could predict. They had never faced the raw, brutal firepower of a species that had never stopped preparing for war. Direct hits across the formation, the weapons officer reported. Enemy casualties in the hundreds. Keep firing, Chen ordered. Don't give them time to adapt. The battle raged for 3 hours. Human ships carved bloody paths through the Vraxith swarm while Concorde vessels watched in stunned amazement. The elder races had never seen anything like this. They had never seen ships that charged directly into enemy formations. They had never seen weapons that destroyed targets by the dozen instead of one at a time. When it was over, more than 2,000 Vraxith bioships had been destroyed. The human fleet had lost 12 vessels. Chen surveyed the aftermath from his bridge. The Concorde survivors had gathered around the human formation, their ships battered but intact. They were safe. For now. Admiral Chen, a voice said over the communication channel. This is Fleet Commander Veth of the Concorde Combined Fleet. We have no words to express our gratitude. Save your gratitude, Chen replied. This was just the first battle. There will be many more, and they won't all be this easy. He looked at the sensor display. Even after losing 2,000 ships, the Vraxith swarm was still out there. Still hungry, still spreading. The real war starts now, he said quietly. And before it's over, a lot of good people are going to die. He turned to his bridge crew. Get me full damage reports. Coordinate with the Concorde survivors, and someone find me some coffee. We have a long night ahead of us. The first victory had been won. But Chen knew better than to celebrate. The Vraxith were just getting started, and so was humanity. In the weeks that followed, the human fleet pushed deeper into conquered space. They liberated worlds that had been under siege. They rescued populations that had been marked for consumption. They fought battles that cost hundreds of lives and saved millions. The galaxy watched in amazement. These were the humans, the savages, the primitives, the species too dangerous to join civilized society. They were also the only thing standing between the elder races and extinction. Admiral Chen pushed his fleet hard. He knew that every day they delayed was another day for the Vraxith to consume more worlds, more lives, more hope. We cannot rest, he told his officers during a strategy meeting. The Vraxith never rest. They never sleep. They never stop. If we slow down, they win. If we hesitate, they win. The only way to beat them is to be faster, harder, more relentless than they are. His fleet listened, and they followed, because that was what humans did. When faced with impossible odds and certain death, they did not surrender. They did not flee. They fought harder. They pushed further. They refused to give up. The galaxy had forgotten what that looked like. It was about to be reminded. The war spread across 1,000 light-years of space. Human fleets ranged throughout conquered territory, striking at Vraxith swarms wherever they gathered. The elder races watched in amazement as the species they had dismissed as savages fought with a fury they could barely comprehend. Commodore Elena Vasquez commanded the Third Strike Force, a fast-moving formation of destroyers and cruisers designed to hit hard and disappear before the enemy could respond. She had learned much in the 6 months since the war began. She had learned what it felt like to watch her ships burn. She had learned what it meant to give orders that sent people to their deaths. She had also learned how to win. Vraxith formation detected bearing 274, her sensor officer reported. Approximately 300 bioships. They're moving toward the evacuation point at Kasari IV. Elena studied the tactical display. Kasari IV was a Vorthani colony world with a population of 600 million. The Concorde had been evacuating civilians for 3 days, but the operation was behind schedule. If the Vraxith reached the planet before the transports departed, millions would die. How long until they reached the colony? She asked. 4 hours at current speed. Elena made a quick calculation. Her strike force could intercept the Vraxith in 2 hours. That would buy time for the evacuation, but her ships would be outnumbered 3-1. All ships, set intercept course, she ordered. We're going to slow them down. Her executive officer, Commander David Park, looked up from his console. Commodore, those are not good odds. I know, but if we don't stop them, 600 million people die. Elena's voice was calm but firm. That's not acceptable. The strike force accelerated toward the Vraxith formation. 32 human ships against 300 enemy bioships. On paper, it was suicide. In practice, it was just another day in the war. Elena had learned that the Vraxith were predictable in some ways. They always moved in swarm formations. They always attacked from multiple angles. They always targeted the largest enemy ships first. She had used that knowledge to develop tactics that exploited their patterns. All ships, formation Delta 7, she ordered. Missile boats take the flanks. Destroyers form the center. When we engage, I want overlapping fields of fire. Don't let them isolate any of our ships. The formation shifted smoothly. Her crews had practiced these maneuvers hundreds of times. They moved like parts of a single machine. The Vraxith swarm detected the human ships and changed course to intercept. Elena watched the enemy formation spread out, preparing to envelope her strike force from multiple directions. Just like last time, she murmured. They never learn. At maximum missile range, she gave the order. All ships, fire. 120 nuclear missiles streaked toward the Vraxith formation. The bioships tried to scatter, but the missiles were faster. Brilliant flashes lit up the void as warheads detonated among the swarm. Dozens of bioships were vaporized instantly. Dozens more were badly damaged. Before the enemy could recover, Elena's destroyers opened fire with their railguns. Streams of hypersonic metal slugs tore through the disorganized Vraxith formation. More bioships died. Push through, Elena ordered. Don't let them reform. Her ships surged forward, cutting through the center of the enemy formation. Point defense cannons blazed, destroying smaller Vraxith creatures that tried to board the human vessels. Marines in powered armor stood ready at airlocks, prepared to repel any intruders that made it through. The battle lasted 45 minutes. When it was over, 237 Vraxith bioships had been destroyed. Elena had lost 9 ships. Kesari IV, reports evacuation complete. Her communications officer announced. All civilian transports have departed. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. 600 million lives saved. 9 ships lost. It was the kind of trade she made every day now. The kind of math that kept her awake at night. Set course for the rally point, she ordered. And get damage reports from all surviving vessels. As her battered ships limped toward safety, she thought about the crews she had lost. She knew their names, their faces, their stories. She carried them with her like stones in her heart, but she could not afford to grieve. Not yet. There were more battles to fight, more worlds to save, more people counting on her to make the impossible choices. The war did not care about her grief. Across the galaxy, humanity's war machine was in full operation. On Earth, factories worked around the clock producing weapons and ships. New vessels were launched every week. New weapons were developed every month. The entire human civilization had been reorganized for a single purpose: victory. Admiral Chen coordinated the campaign from the Hammer of Terra. He had divided his forces into multiple fleets, each assigned to different sectors of conquered space. The strategy was simple: spread out, hit hard, keep the Vraxith off balance. It was working. The enemy advance had slowed dramatically. Worlds that would have fallen months ago were still standing. Populations that would have been consumed were being evacuated to safety. But the cost was terrible. Casualty reports from last month, Commander Park said, placing a data pad on Chen's desk. 37 ships lost. 18,000 personnel killed or missing. Chen looked at the numbers. He had learned to read them without emotion. If he allowed himself to feel the weight of each death, he would collapse under the burden. And enemy losses? Approximately 400,000 bioships destroyed. Based on our estimates, That represents roughly 2% of the total swarm. 2%. 18,000 human lives for 2% of the enemy force. Chen did the math in his head. At this rate, they would run out of humans long before they ran out of Vrexith. We need to be more efficient, he said. We're winning battles but losing the war. Park nodded. The science teams have some ideas. New weapons, new tactics. But they need time to develop them. Time is the one thing we don't have. Chen stood up and walked to the window. Stars stretched out before him, cold and distant. Somewhere out there, the Vrexith were regrouping, adapting, learning. There has to be a way to hurt them badly enough that they can't recover, he said. Not just kill ships. Kill their ability to coordinate. Kill their will to fight. Do they have a will to fight? Park asked. They're a hive mind. They don't think like we do. Everything that lives has something it wants to protect, something it can't afford to lose. Chen turned back to his aide. Find out what that is. Find their weakness, and tell me how to exploit it. The answer came 3 weeks later from an unlikely source. Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to the Admiral, was a xenobiologist stationed aboard the research vessel Unity. She had been studying captured Vrexith specimens since the war began, trying to understand how the hive mind functioned. The Vrexith are not truly independent organisms, she explained in her report to Fleet Command. Each individual creature is more like a cell in a larger body. They have no consciousness of their own, no will, no purpose except what the hive mind gives them. Chen studied her findings with growing interest. How does the hive mind control them? Through a network of specialized creatures we've designated queen nodes. These beings serve as relay points for the hive mind's consciousness. They transmit orders and coordinate local swarms. Dr. Chen pulled up an image of one of these creatures. It was larger than a bioship, roughly spherical, and covered in sensory organs. Destroy enough queen nodes, and the local swarm becomes disorganized. The individual creatures lose coordination. They fight less effectively. We've noticed that, Admiral Chen said. But even when we destroy the queen nodes, the swarm eventually recovers. They adapt. Because the queen nodes are replaceable, the hive mind can create new ones whenever it needs to. Dr. Chen's expression grew serious. But there's something that isn't replaceable. The central nexus of the entire hive mind. We've been calling it the Queen Core. Admiral Chen leaned forward. Tell me more. Based on our analysis, all Vrexith consciousness ultimately originates from a single source. One creature, somewhere in the heart of their territory, that serves as the brain for the entire species. Without it, the hive mind would collapse. The Vrexith would become little more than animals. Dangerous animals, but animals nonetheless. Where is it? We don't know yet. But we're working on it. Admiral Chen stood up. For the first time in months, he felt something like hope. Find it, he ordered. Whatever resources you need, you have them. Find that Queen Core and tell me how to kill it. While the scientists searched for the heart of the hive mind, the war continued. Colonel James Okafor commanded the 42nd Marine Division, the most decorated ground combat unit in human history. His soldiers had fought on a dozen worlds, holding positions against overwhelming odds while civilians evacuated behind them. The Battle of Kirith IV would be their greatest challenge. Kirith IV was a mountainous world with a population of 800 million. The Vrexith had landed ground forces 3 weeks ago, and the local Concord garrison had been overrun within days. The human fleet had established a perimeter, but they could not stop the enemy's ground advance. The evacuation will take at least 2 weeks, Admiral Chen told Okafor during the mission briefing. We need you to hold the mountain passes until it's complete. Okafor studied the tactical map. The terrain favored defenders, but the Vrexith had unlimited numbers. They could absorb casualties that would break any normal army and keep coming. How many enemy troops are we facing? He asked. Our estimates put the ground swarm at approximately 50 million individuals. Okafor laughed. It was not a happy sound. And I have 12,000 Marines. I know. Chen's voice was heavy. I wouldn't ask if there was any other option. Okafor looked at the Admiral for a long moment. They had known each other for 20 years. They had served together, fought together, buried friends together. My Marines will hold, Okafor said finally. Whatever it costs. James, Chen started. Don't. Okafor held up his hand. We both know what this means. Let me do my job. The 42nd Marine Division landed on Kirith IV 2 days later. They established defensive positions in the mountain passes leading to the evacuation zone. They dug trenches. They laid mines. They prepared fields of fire that would turn the narrow valleys into killing grounds. And then they waited. The Vraxith came on the third day. They came in waves, millions of creatures swarming up the mountainsides like a living flood. The Marines opened fire with everything they had. Railgun emplacements tore bloody gaps in the enemy ranks. Artillery shells exploded among the packed formations. Machine guns swept back and forth, cutting down thousands in seconds. The Vraxith died by the tens of thousands. And still they kept coming. "Hold the line," Okafor's voice boomed through the command channel. "They want through. They pay in blood." The Marines held. For 3 days, they fought without rest. Ammunition ran low and was rationed. Wounded soldiers patched themselves up and returned to the line. The dead were stacked behind the trenches because there was no time to bury them. On the 4th day, the Vraxith changed tactics. They began burrowing through the mountains, trying to bypass the defensive positions. Okafor responded by collapsing tunnels with explosive charges and sending teams to hunt down infiltrators in the dark. On the 7th day, the enemy attempted a massive frontal assault. They threw millions of creatures at the human positions in a single wave. The Marines fought until their guns overheated and their ammunition was exhausted. Then they fought with knives and fists and bare hands. When the wave finally broke, 20,000 Vraxith corpses littered the approaches. 300 Marines had died. On the 10th day, Okafor himself was wounded when a Vraxith infiltrator breached the command bunker. He killed the creature with his sidearm and continued directing the defense from his medical bed. "Evacuation at 70%, his aide reported. "Tell them to speed it up," Okafor growled. "We can't hold much longer." But they did hold. Day after day, night after night, through pain and exhaustion and despair, they held. On the 17th day, the last transport lifted off from Kyrath 4. 800 million civilians had been safely evacuated. Mission complete. Okafor transmitted to the fleet. "Request immediate extraction for surviving personnel." "Copy that, Colonel. Rescue shuttles are inbound." "How many survivors?" Okafor looked around at the shattered remains of his command post. His 12,000 Marines had been reduced to 43 walking wounded. 43, he said quietly. "There are 43 of us left." The rescue shuttles landed an hour later. As he was carried aboard, Okafor recorded a final message for Fleet Command. "They wanted to know what makes humans different," he said. His voice was weak, but his words were clear. "Tell them this. We don't know how to quit. We don't know how to surrender. We fight until the job is done or until every last one of us is dead. That's what makes us human. That's what makes us dangerous. And that's why the Vraxith will never beat us." The message was broadcast across the human fleet, across Concord space, across the entire galaxy. Colonel James Okafor became a legend. His 43 survivors became heroes, and the 42nd Marine Division became a symbol of everything humanity stood for. They held the line. They paid the price. And they never stopped fighting. The war entered its 2nd year. Humanity had lost over 100,000 soldiers and sailors. They had lost 200 ships. They had won battles that should have been impossible and survived defeats that should have been fatal. And they were still standing. The Vraxith had learned to fear them, not because human weapons were unstoppable, but because humans were. They had faced species that surrendered, species that fled, species that broke under pressure. Humans just got angrier. Admiral Chen studied the latest intelligence reports in his quarters. The Vraxith expansion had slowed dramatically. They were consolidating their territory, pulling back from exposed positions, concentrating their forces. "They're scared," Commander Park observed. "Scared or smart," Chen replied. "They've figured out that we're different, that the tactics that worked against the Concord don't work against us." He pulled up a strategic map. "They're regrouping, preparing for something big. A final offensive? Maybe. Or maybe they're trying to protect something." Chen zoomed in on a region of space at the heart of Vraxith territory. "We still haven't found the Queen Core, but we know it has to be somewhere in here. That's the most heavily defended region of enemy space," Park said. "Even with our entire fleet, we couldn't punch through those defenses. Not by conventional means," Chen agreed. "But we didn't come this far by being conventional." He stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the stars burned cold and bright. Somewhere out there, In the darkness between galaxies, the heart of the hive mind waited. "Contact Dr. Chen," he ordered. "Tell her we need her latest findings on the Queen Core. And get me Commodore Vasquez. I have a mission for her." The next phase of the war was about to begin, and humanity was ready. The third year of the war began with a discovery that would change everything. Dr. Sarah Chen had spent 18 months studying Vraxith biology, communication patterns, and behavior. She had dissected thousands of specimens. She had analyzed millions of data points. She had traced the neural pathways that connected individual creatures to the hive mind. And finally, she had found what she was looking for. "The Queen Core is located here," she said, pointing to a star system on the holographic map. "Vraxith Prime, the original homeworld of the entire species." Admiral Chen studied the display. The system was deep inside enemy territory, protected by the largest concentration of Vraxith forces in the galaxy. Intelligence estimates put the defensive swarm at over 10 million bioships. "How certain are you?" he asked. 97%. The neural communication patterns all converge on this point. Every command, every order, every thought in the hive mind passes through Vraxith Prime. "Doctor," Chen's voice was steady, "destroy the Queen Core, and you destroy the hive mind itself. And then, the individual Vraxith will lose their coordination, their intelligence. They'll revert to basic instincts. They'll still be dangerous, but they won't be able to organize. They won't be able to plan. They won't be able to adapt." Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment. He had been waiting for this information for 3 years. 3 years of fighting, 3 years of dying, 3 years of watching good people sacrifice everything for a victory that always seemed just out of reach. Now the end was in sight. "How do we get through 10 million ships?" Commander Park asked. "We don't," Admiral Chen said. "Not with conventional tactics. If we throw our entire fleet at Vraxith Prime, we might punch through the defenses, but we'd lose 90% of our ships in the process. We'd win the battle and lose the war. Then what's the alternative?" Chen turned to look at the tactical display. He had spent months planning for this moment. He had considered every option, every strategy, every desperate gamble. There was only one plan that gave them a reasonable chance of success, and it required a weapon that humanity had sworn never to use. "Project Helios," he said quietly. Commander Park's face went pale. "Admiral, that weapon. The Council banned it 20 years ago. The technology was supposed to be destroyed. The technology was archived. Just in case." Chen's voice was heavy with the weight of his decision. Helios was designed to ignite the fusion reaction in a star, turn it into a temporary nova, destroy everything within 10 light minutes of the blast. "You're talking about destroying an entire star system. I'm talking about ending this war." Chen turned to face his aide. "We can't beat the Vraxith ship by ship. We don't have enough guns. We don't have enough time. We need to cut off the head in one blow." "But Helios." Park shook her head. "Even if it works, we'd be using a weapon of mass destruction on a scale that makes nuclear bombs look like firecrackers. The Concord will never forgive us. The Concord will be alive to not forgive us. That's what matters." Chen walked to the window and stared out at the stars. "I didn't want it to come to this. I hoped we would find another way. But there is no other way. The Vraxith won't stop. They can't stop. It's not in their nature." He turned back to Park. "Contact Earth. Tell them we need Project Helios delivered to the fleet. And tell them I take full responsibility for this decision." The message reached Earth 3 days later. The United Nations Stellar Command debated for less than an hour before approving Chen's request. Secretary General Okonkwo personally authorized the release of the weapon. "God forgive us for what we are about to do," she said, as she signed the order. Project Helios arrived at the fleet 2 weeks later. It was smaller than Chen had expected. A single device, roughly the size of a small shuttle, carried aboard a specialized transport ship. Inside that device was enough power to destroy a star. Chen gathered his senior officers to explain the plan. "The assault on Vraxith Prime will proceed in 3 phases, he said. "First, Commodore Vasquez will lead a diversionary attack on the system's outer defenses. Her mission is to draw as many enemy ships away from the inner system as possible." Elena Vasquez nodded. She had been briefed on her role hours earlier. She knew it was likely a one-way mission. "Second, while the enemy is engaged with the diversionary force, a strike team will penetrate the inner system and deploy Project Helios near the star. The device will require approximately 30 minutes to charge before detonation. 30 minutes inside the most heavily defended system in Vraxith space, one of the officers muttered. That's not a mission. That's suicide. I will lead the strike team personally, Chen said. The Hammer of Terra and a volunteer crew will carry Helios to the target. The room fell silent. Every officer understood what Chen was saying. He was not asking anyone to do something he would not do himself. Third, once Helios is deployed, all surviving ships will withdraw to minimum safe distance. When the device detonates, the star will go nova. Everything within the system will be destroyed, including the Queen Core. And the strike team? Someone asked. Chen met their eyes. The strike team will not have time to escape. We know that going in. Commander Park stepped forward. Admiral, you can't. I can, and I will. Chen's voice left no room for argument. I've sent thousands of people to their deaths over the past 3 years. I've given orders that cost lives I can never repay. This time, I lead from the front. He looked around the room at the officers who had served with him, fought with him, believed in him. This is what we came here to do. This is how we end the war. This is how we save the galaxy. He straightened his shoulders. I need volunteers for the strike team. Only volunteers. No one is ordered to die. Every officer in the room raised their hand. Chen smiled. It was a sad smile, but genuine. I expected nothing less. Thank you. The final battle began 2 days later. Commodore Vasquez led her diversionary force into the outer reaches of the Vraxith Prime system. 200 ships, against a defensive swarm of millions. Her mission was not to win. Her mission was to make noise. All ships, engage at maximum range, she ordered. Make them come to us. Nuclear missiles streaked toward the enemy formation. Railguns thundered. Point defense systems blazed at incoming Vraxith fighters. The battle was joined, and the outer defenses began to respond. Vraxith bioships peeled away from the inner system, rushing to meet the human threat. Hundreds at first, then thousands, then tens of thousands. That's it, Vasquez murmured as she watched the enemy swarm shift. Come and get us. Her ships fought a running battle, retreating slowly while drawing more and more enemy forces away from Vraxith Prime. They took losses. Ships exploded. Crews died. But they kept fighting. They kept running. They kept buying time. Deep inside the system, the Hammer of Terra and 12 escort vessels slipped through the weakened defenses. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge, watching the tactical display as his small fleet navigated through the chaos. The Vraxith were so focused on the diversionary force that they barely noticed the handful of ships cutting toward the heart of their territory. Enemy contacts ahead, the sensor officer reported. Approximately 50 bioships. They're moving to intercept. All escorts. Engage, Chen ordered. Clear us a path. The 12 escort ships surged forward, their weapons blazing. They hit the enemy formation like a hammer hitting glass. Bioships shattered under the onslaught. The escorts died as they fought, but they opened a gap. The Hammer of Terra pushed through. Approaching deployment range, the navigation officer announced. 2 minutes to target coordinates. Chen looked at the main display. The star of Vraxith Prime burned before them. A massive ball of nuclear fire that had warmed the birthplace of the hive mind for billions of years. In 30 minutes, it would become something else entirely. Deploy Helios. The weapon bay doors opened. Project Helios slid out into the void, its systems activating automatically. Countdown timers appeared on every display throughout the ship. 30 minutes. All hands. This is the Admiral, Chen announced over the ship-wide communication system. Helios has been deployed. The weapon will detonate in 30 minutes. There is no possibility of escape. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. I want to thank each and every one of you. You volunteered for this mission knowing what it meant. You chose to give your lives so that others might live. That is the highest form of courage I know. The enemy thought they could consume us. They thought we were soft, weak, easy prey. They were wrong. Today, we show them what humanity is capable of. Today, we end this war. Today, we save the galaxy. It has been my honor to serve with you. Now let's finish the job. The response came from across the ship. Officers and enlisted personnel, men and women, young and old. They had known the cost when they volunteered. They had made their peace. For Earth, someone said. For humanity, another added. For everyone who's counting on us, a third voice finished. Chen smiled. His crew, his people, the finest humans he had ever known. The Vraxith realized too late what was happening. As the countdown timer passed 20 minutes, massive swarms of bioships began converging on the Hammer of Terra. They came from every direction, millions of creatures desperate to stop the weapon that threatened their existence. Chen ordered his ship to hold position directly above the Helios device. If they moved, the enemy might be able to destroy the weapon before it fired. The only way to guarantee success was to stand and fight. All weapons free, he ordered. Make every shot count. The final battle of the war raged around a single human ship. The Hammer of Terra's guns blazed without pause, destroying thousands of bioships. Her shields flickered and failed under the sustained assault. Her hull was breached in a dozen places. Marines fought hand-to-hand against Vraxith boarders in the corridors. 15 minutes. The bridge took a direct hit. Half the crew was killed instantly. Chen was thrown against a bulkhead, his arm broken, blood running down his face. He pulled himself back to his feet and returned to his command chair. Status report. Weapons at 40%, someone answered. Shields down. Hull breaches on decks 3 through 7. Hold the line. 10 minutes. The Vraxith threw everything they had at the human ship. Bioships rammed the hull, tearing open massive wounds in the armor. Creatures swarmed through the breaches, fighting Marines who refused to give ground. The engines failed. The power systems flickered. All hands. Fall back to the bridge, Chen ordered. We hold here until the end. 50 survivors gathered in the command center. Marines in battered armor, engineers with improvised weapons, officers who had never expected to die in combat. They formed a defensive perimeter around the tactical display, where the countdown timer continued its relentless march. 5 minutes. The doors burst open. Vraxith creatures flooded into the bridge. The humans met them with fire and steel. Bodies fell on both sides. The screams of the dying mixed with the roar of weapons. Chen fought alongside his crew. His broken arm hung useless at his side, but his other hand held a pistol. He fired until the magazine was empty, then used the weapon as a club. 3 minutes. The Marines were down. The engineers were down. Chen found himself backed against the main display, surrounded by bodies and blood. A handful of his crew still stood, forming a final circle around their admiral. 1 minute. A Vraxith creature lunged at Chen. He shot it in the head. Another came, and another. He killed them until his weapon was empty and his strength was gone. 30 seconds. Chen looked at the countdown timer. So close. They were so close. Come on, he whispered. Come on. 10 seconds. The Vraxith surged forward in a final rush. 0. Project Helios detonated. For a brief moment, the star of Vraxith Prime became something more than a star. It became a force of pure destruction. A wave of energy beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen swept outward at the speed of light. The Hammer of Terra was vaporized instantly. So were the millions of bioships surrounding her. So was every planet in the system. So was the Queen Core, the ancient creature that had been the brain of the Vraxith hive mind for millions of years. The nova burned for 3 days before it finally subsided. When it was over, nothing remained of Vraxith Prime but an expanding cloud of superheated plasma and a fading glow that would be visible across half the galaxy. The hive mind screamed. Across 1,000 light-years of space, every Vraxith creature felt the death of the Queen Core, the loss of the connection that had bound them together since the dawn of their species, the severing of the consciousness that had given them purpose. Vraxith swarms that had been fighting in perfect coordination suddenly dissolved into chaos. Bioships collided with each other. Ground forces stopped mid-attack and wandered aimlessly. The entire species was reduced from a galaxy-spanning threat to billions of confused, mindless animals. The war was over. Commodore Elena Vasquez received the news while her battered fleet limped away from Vraxith Prime. She had lost 140 ships in the diversionary attack. She had nearly died half a dozen times. She had won the greatest victory in human history. And she had lost her commanding officer, her mentor, her friend. Admiral Chen's final transmission, her communications officer said quietly, handing her a datapad. Elena read the message through tears. To all ships, this is Admiral Marcus Chen. If you're receiving this, then Helios worked, and the war is over. I want to thank every man and woman who fought in this campaign. Your courage and sacrifice saved the galaxy. I know the cost was high. Too high. But I hope you understand that it was necessary. The Vraxith would not have stopped. They could not have stopped. The only way to end the threat was to end them. I do not know how history will judge us. Perhaps they will call us heroes. Perhaps they will call us monsters. Either way, we did what had to be done. We protected the people counting on us. We lived up to the trust they placed in our hands. Tell my family I love them. Tell them I'm proud of what we accomplished. And tell them I'm sorry I couldn't come home. Chen out. Elena lowered the data pad. Around her bridge crew stood in silence. Many of them were crying. All of them were exhausted. Set course for Concord space, she ordered quietly. Let's go tell them the war is over. The fleet turned toward friendly territory. Behind them, the glow of the Nova faded slowly into the darkness. Admiral Marcus Chen and the crew of the Hammer of Terra had given their lives to save the galaxy. The galaxy would never forget. The war was over. Across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. The Vraxith hive mind had been destroyed. The endless swarm had been broken. The nightmare that had consumed hundreds of worlds was finally, mercifully, finished. On 1,000 planets, beings of 100 different species looked up at the stars and wept with relief. They had lived in fear for 3 years. They had watched their friends and families die. They had believed, truly believed, that the end of all things had come, and then humanity had saved them. The surviving conquered fleets gathered at the sacred world of Kethran, the ancient meeting place where the elder races had signed their first treaty 12,000 years ago. Ships from 17 species filled the orbital spaces, their crews watching in stunned silence as human vessels took their place among them. Commodore Elena Vasquez commanded the human delegation. She had been promoted to admiral in the wake of Chen's death, given command of what remained of humanity's expeditionary force. It was an honor she had never wanted, a burden she could barely carry. Admiral Vasquez, the communication officer said, "We're receiving a transmission from the Concord Assembly. They're requesting your presence at the summit." Elena nodded slowly. "Tell them I'll be there." She took a shuttle down to the surface of Kethran. The planet was beautiful in a way that human worlds rarely matched. Crystal spires rose from perfect gardens. Rivers flowed through channels carved by artists who had lived and died before humanity learned to walk upright. The assembly hall was the largest structure on the planet. It could hold representatives from every species in the Concord, with room to spare. Elena walked through its ancient doors and found herself facing the collected leadership of galactic civilization. They were all there. The crystalline Shael, the insectoid Keth, the gas giant dwelling Vorthani in their environmental suits, species that Elena had never seen before, whose names she did not know, all of them watching her with eyes that held something she had not expected: respect. Ambassador Tethan Vorasi rose from her seat and moved to meet Elena at the center of the hall. The Shael diplomat had been present at the beginning, when she had begged Captain Vasquez for help aboard the Perseverance. Now, she stood at the end, ready to acknowledge what humanity had done. "Admiral Vasquez," Tethan said, her harmonic voice carrying through the silent chamber. "On behalf of the Galactic Concord, I welcome you to this assembly, and on behalf of every species in this galaxy, I offer our deepest gratitude." Elena inclined her head. "Ambassador, we called you savages," Tethan continued. "We called you primitives. We told you that you were not worthy of joining our civilization." Her light dimmed with what Elena recognized as shame. "We were wrong. We were so very wrong." She gestured to the assembled representatives. "Every being in this chamber owes their life to humanity. Every world we still possess exists because of your sacrifice. We asked you for help, and you gave us everything." "Not everything," Elena said quietly. "We lost too many good people. Admiral Chen, Colonel Okafor, thousands of soldiers and sailors who believed in something worth dying for." She looked around at the alien faces. "They gave everything. I just followed orders." "You did more than follow orders," Tethan replied. "You led. You fought. You refused to give up when any other species would have retreated. Your Admiral Chen destroyed the Queen Corps knowing it would cost his life. That is not following orders. That is heroism beyond measure." She turned to face the full assembly. "I move that the Galactic Concord formally admit humanity as a founding member of this body, not as a junior partner, not as an observer, as an equal, as a pillar upon which the future of this galaxy will be built." The vote was instantaneous and unanimous. For 200 years, Humanity had been denied membership in the Concord. They had been told they were too violent, too dangerous, too primitive to sit alongside the elder races. Now they stood at the center of galactic civilization, elevated to a position that no other species had ever achieved. The savages had become the saviors. Elena did not know how to respond. She stood in the assembly hall surrounded by beings who had once looked down on her species with contempt. Now they looked at her with something approaching awe. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Then let me speak for a moment," a new voice said. A holographic image appeared at the center of the hall. It was Admiral Marcus Chen, recorded in the final hours before the assault on Vraxith Prime. His face was tired but determined. His eyes burned with quiet fire. "I recorded this message knowing I would not survive to deliver it in person," Chen said. "But I wanted the Concord to hear directly from humanity, to understand who we are and what we stand for." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "You called us violent. You were right. We are violent. We carry war in our genes, in our history, in our souls. We have fought each other since we climbed down from the trees. We have built weapons of terrible destruction. We have done things that shame us. But violence is not all we are. We are also loyal, stubborn, protective of those we love. When we give our word to defend something, we do not stop until the job is done or until every last one of us is dead." Chen's image looked around the assembly hall as if he could see the faces of those who would eventually watch this recording. The Vraxith learned what happens when humanity goes to war. They learned that we do not surrender. We do not retreat. We do not accept defeat. We fight with everything we have. And when that is not enough, we find more to give. Let that lesson echo through this galaxy forever. We are not your enemies. We never were. We are the species that remembers how to fight. We are the wolves who guard the flock. We are the monsters who chose to protect instead of destroy." His voice hardened. "If you threaten those under our protection, we will remind you why the universe learned to fear the dark. If you try to consume the innocent, we will burn you out of existence. If you think you can take what is not yours, you will discover that humanity does not forgive. And humanity does not forget." The image softened. Chen smiled. "But if you need help, if you are in danger, if you face a threat you cannot overcome alone, call us. We will come. We will fight for you. We will stand beside you until the darkness passes. That is who we are. That is what we offer this galaxy. Not conquest, not domination, protection, partnership, the promise that you will never have to face the night alone." This is Admiral Marcus Chen, of the United Nations Stellar Command. To every being who hears this message, I say, welcome to the family. We are glad to have you. The recording ended. The assembly hall fell silent. Elena felt tears running down her face. She had served under Chen for 3 years. She had watched him carry the weight of impossible decisions. She had seen him sacrifice everything to finish the mission. Now she understood what he had been fighting for all along. Not glory, not revenge, not even survival. He had been fighting to prove that humanity deserved to stand among the stars, to show the galaxy that the species they had rejected was worthy of trust, of respect, of partnership. He had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. "Admiral Vasquez," Tethan said gently, "would you like to address the assembly?" Elena wiped her eyes and straightened her uniform. She thought about everything she had experienced over the past 3 years. The battles, the losses, the moments of despair and triumph. The friends she had buried and the enemies she had destroyed. She thought about Admiral Chen and Colonel Okafor and the thousands of humans who had given their lives for beings they had never met. They had not asked for glory. They had not demanded gratitude. They had simply done what needed to be done. "My people have a saying," she began. "We say that the measure of a civilization is not how it treats its friends, but how it treats its enemies. How it responds to those who hurt it. How it uses power when it has it." She looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives. "For 2 centuries you treated us as lesser beings. You rejected our requests for partnership. You called us savages and primitives, and told us we were not worthy of your civilization. When the Vraxith came, you could have faced them alone. We could have stayed behind our borders and watched you fall. We could have taken satisfaction in your suffering, and waited for the threat to reach us on our own terms. We didn't. We came when you called. We fought for you. We died for you. Because that is what humans do. That is who we are. Elena's voice grew stronger. I am not going to stand here and pretend that what happened doesn't matter. It does. 200 years of rejection. 200 years of being told we were not good enough. That hurt. It still hurts. But we chose to help you anyway. We chose to put aside our pride and our anger and fight for a galaxy that had never given us a chance. We chose to be better than the treatment we received. She smiled. It was a sad smile, but genuine. I hope you remember that. I hope you remember what humanity did when you needed us most. Not because we want your gratitude, but because I want you to understand something important. The qualities you feared in us, the violence and the aggression and the stubbornness, those same qualities saved your lives. The very things that made you reject us were the things that allowed us to do what no other species could. Maybe that means something. Maybe it means that the things we fear in others, the things that make us uncomfortable, are not always weaknesses. Sometimes they are strengths waiting for the right moment to shine. She looked directly at Ambassador Tethan. We are honored to join the Concord. We will be good partners. We will contribute what we can to the future of this galaxy. But I want to be clear about one thing. We will never stop being human. We will never apologize for who we are. We will never pretend to be something we're not just to make you comfortable. We are violent. We are stubborn. We are dangerous. And if you ever need those qualities again, we will be there. Because that's what partners do. She stepped back. Thank you for listening. I think Admiral Chen said it better than I ever could. Welcome to the family. We're glad to have you. The assembly erupted in applause. Beings of 100 species rose to their feet, their various forms of approval filling the ancient hall with a sound that had never been heard before. Humanity had found its place among the stars. In the months that followed, the galaxy began to rebuild. The Vraxith threat had not been completely eliminated. Millions of mindless creatures still roamed the void, dangerous but directionless. Human and Concord forces worked together to hunt them down, cleaning up the remnants of the hive mind one swarm at a time. It was slow work, patient work, the kind of work that would take decades to complete, but nobody complained. After 3 years of desperate war, steady progress felt like victory. On Earth, the celebrations gave way to mourning. The names of the dead were read aloud in ceremonies that lasted for days. Monuments were built. Stories were told. A generation that had grown up in peacetime learned what their parents and grandparents had sacrificed. Admiral Marcus Chen was buried with full military honors. His memorial stood in Geneva, overlooking the mountains where humanity had made its decision to go to war. Every year, on the anniversary of the Battle of Vraxith Prime, people gathered there to remember. Colonel James Okafor received the highest award humanity could offer, the Star of Earth. His 43 survivors became celebrities, their story told and retold until it passed into legend. The 42nd Marine Division was reconstituted with a new generation of soldiers, all of them determined to live up to the example their predecessors had set. Commodore Elena Vasquez was promoted to Fleet Admiral and given command of humanity's permanent presence in conquered space. She led with the same determination and courage that had defined her wartime service. Under her watch, human and alien ships learned to work together. Old prejudices faded. New friendships formed. Ambassador Tethin Vorasi remained humanity's closest ally among the elder races. She spent the final centuries of her long life working to strengthen the bond between their species. When she finally passed, she was buried on Earth, the first alien ever to be laid to rest in human soil. The Galactic Concord changed as well. The old ways, the assumption that violence was always wrong and war was always avoidable, gave way to a more practical understanding. The elder races began to rebuild their military capabilities, learning from human tactics and strategies. They hoped they would never need those capabilities. But they had learned, through bitter experience, that hope was not enough. Sometimes, you had to be ready to fight, and humanity would be there to teach them how. 10 years after the war ended, a ceremony was held at the site where Vraxith Prime had once existed. A monument was placed in orbit around the fading remnant of the nova. A simple stone marker with words carved in 100 languages. Here died the Hammer of Terra and her crew. Here fell Admiral Marcus Chen and the brave humans who served with him. Here ended the threat that would have consumed the galaxy. They came when we called. They fought when we could not. They gave everything so that we might live. Let this place be a reminder of what was lost and what was gained. Humanity answered with fire and steel, and the galaxy trembled, not in fear, In gratitude, the marker floated in the void, a silent witness to the greatest sacrifice in the history of the galaxy. Ships from 100 worlds came to visit it. Beings of every species stood in silence before it, paying their respects to the dead, and somewhere, in the distant regions of space where humans continued to explore and expand, new worlds were colonized, new children were born, new stories were begun. The galaxy had been saved, not by the wise and ancient elder races, not by elegant technology or sophisticated diplomacy, by a young species that refused to give up, by soldiers who fought until their guns were empty and then fought with their bare hands, by ordinary people who chose to be extraordinary. Humanity had found its place among the stars, and the stars would never forget.